Welcome everyone to this video. Our film today begins with a teenager named Calvin Cambridge, who lives in an orphanage in Chesterfield with his two best friends, Murph and Rag. The three friends enjoy playing basketball in the orphanage's courtyard. One morning, while playing basketball, a group of bullies led by Ox interrupts them. They challenge Calvin to a game for his basketball jersey. While Calvin's friends suggest ignoring the bully, the ambitious boy wants to take up the challenge like his favorite basketball players. The match begins, and Ox easily dominates due to a significant size difference. As promised, he takes Calvin's jersey and tears it just to provoke him. Stan Pettleman, the director of the orphanage, often sells candies to the children to help them earn a little money. That evening, they are outside the Los Angeles Knights home game, an NBA team, selling candies. At the end of the game, Calvin spots coach Nuns Viger getting into a car, and he approaches the man and offers him candies. When the coach learns that the candies are intended for a charitable cause, he gives Calvin a $20 bill. However, Calvin refuses to accept it as he is unsure if the money he collects that evening is truly meant for charity. Impressed by the boy's integrity, the mysterious man offers Calvin 4 tickets to the next basketball game. Overjoyed, Calvin runs to tell Murph about what just happened. The next day, a couple arrives at the shelter in search of a baby. At first, Calvin hopes to be adopted, but he quickly realizes that the parents want a small child. Later, he is given a box of free clothes from a thrift store. Calvin takes a pair of sneakers and tries them on. When he questions his caretaker about the sneakers, she tells him that they belong to a famous basketball player. Upon looking at them, Calvin sees the initials MJ on them, indicating they belong to Michael Jordan. Ox becomes jealous of the sneakers and wants to take them. He forcefully grabs them and throws them up in the air. To Calvin's disappointment, the shoes get tangled in an electrical cable during a stormy night while everyone is asleep. Calvin wakes up Murph to help him retrieve the shoes from the cable. They go out in the pouring rain, and Calvin manages to climb a tree near the cable to grab his sneakers. However, lightning strikes the shoes directly, causing Calvin to fall to the ground, fortunately without serious injury. The next day, the children are back at the arena selling candies. Calvin, Murph, and Rag receive 4 tickets as the coach had promised. Ox and his friends see them and feel jealous. The bullies threaten to tell Pettleman that they bought the tickets with charity money. To prevent any trouble, Calvin offers Ox one of the tickets. All 4 of them enjoy the game between the Knights and the Minnesota team. At the end of the match, the star player of the team, Tracy Reynolds, and one of the coaches take part in a halftime show to attract more spectators. Someone from the audience will have the chance to meet Tracy one-on-one. To everyone's surprise, Calvin's ticket number wins. Ox tries to snatch the ticket from his hand, but Calvin manages to trick him and runs towards the stage with his ticket. Tracy shows a little mercy as Calvin is just a child and lets him win the first round to impress the audience. But after that, he has to stop the kid or he will be embarrassed. Tracy does his best but can't prevent Calvin from scoring by doing a crazy move. The crowd is in shock and applauds frantically, while Tracy, feeling embarrassed, decides to retire from the game. The next day, the coaches of the Knights meet quickly with Pettleman to ask him to let Calvin play for them. At first, the director resists, but he agrees to let Calvin go when they offer him money. Calvin's friends are delighted and very happy for him. On the other hand, Ox is furious because Calvin couldn't even beat Ox before getting the basketball shoes. The children conclude that the shoes are magical, and they decide to keep the secret so that no one tries to expose them, not knowing that Ox overheard them talking about it. The next day, Calvin enters the Knights' locker room, which annoys Tracy. His teammates ask Tracy to stay close because the kid is on his way to their club. Calvin receives a Knights jersey and a pair of new basketball shoes. Calvin asks the coach if he can wear his old shoes, but the coach doesn't care about the clothes. Calvin's presence is just a publicity stunt, so it doesn't matter how he plays. Calvin's popularity has increased exponentially after the last game, which has attracted more people to the stands. Calvin can't play the first half of the match as their team is about to lose. He asks the coach to give him a chance. Although skeptical, the coach lets Calvin play. Since he's not wearing his lucky shoes, Calvin becomes nervous and calls for a timeout. Calvin bores everyone as he runs to the locker room to put on his old shoes. When he returns, he is much more confident, and effectively helps his team catch up with the opponent in points and helps them win. After the match, Calvin signs a contract to play with the team for the rest of the tournament. Calvin is in the foyer, getting ready to go to the tournament. Petalman explains to the boy that he is still his guardian and tells him to be careful because there may be people who will want to adopt him only because of his money. On the plane, the coach assigns Tressie and Calvin to a shared room. Calvin appreciates the opportunity to share a room with his idol, but Tressie is not so enthusiastic. At night, there is a curfew that Tressie has no intention of obeying. He gets ready for his date and leaves after teaching Calvin how to use room service. The kid can eat wherever and as much as he wants, and he takes full advantage of it. When Tressie returns with his girlfriend, the room is littered with unconsumed food, and they were expecting to spend the night together. However, Calvin, who has eaten too much, prefers to stay quiet. The boys go to bed late, but even though he is tired, Tressie has trouble falling asleep because of Calvin's snoring. They have an important match the next day, but Tressie is exhausted. Calvin unintentionally informs the coach that they stayed up late, and the coach warns Tressie that he will suspend him if he breaks curfew again. From that day on, Calvin plays a few games with the Knights and helps them win. The opponents don't know what to expect when they face the team with the kid, and he surprises them with his skills. He participates in several press conferences and earns a lot of money from the games he plays. He buys a bunch of gifts for everyone at the shelter. He also wins an NBA dunk contest and becomes the most talented rising star in basketball. One evening, Calvin talks to Murph about his new life and the joy he experiences when playing in the NBA. Jelisox overhears them and tries to take Calvin's shoes, starting a fight. The brawl stops when Petalman intervenes, as he doesn't want Calvin to get hurt now that he's earning so much money. The next time the team is at a hotel, Tressie goes to the pharmacy to buy sleeping pills and allergy medication to ensure a good night's sleep. Before the match the next day, Calvin joins Tressie for the ride, much to Tressie's disappointment. On the way, the boy starts asking questions about Tressie's parents. He learns that Tressie has a father whom he doesn't talk to. This seems strange to Calvin, as he would do anything to have both parents around. Tressie states that he doesn't want to talk about his family and continues driving, not paying close attention to the pharmacist who gives him pills. Instead of allergy medication, Tressie takes sleeping pills, causing him to fall asleep before starting the car and returning to the hotel. Calvin knows that if they don't make it back before curfew, Tressie will be suspended. So, he drives the car back to the hotel, damaging some objects along the way. The next day, Calvin is suspended from the match and could have gone for a walk instead. Tressie feels bad that the boy is being punished for his mistake. Later that night, on the return flight, Tressie thanks Calvin for standing up for him and saving him. Tressie starts to like the boy after spending time with him. When Calvin returns to the orphanage, several couples show up to adopt him. Murph becomes jealous because he also wants a family. Since Petalman doesn't want Calvin to be adopted, he purposely chooses the worst parents and arranges for them to meet Calvin. Calvin doesn't like the adults he meets and decides to stay at the orphanage instead. Without warning, Calvin decides to go to Tressie's place. He is fascinated by the size of the player's mansion. When asked why he is there, Calvin tells Tressie that Murph is upset about not having good parents and has a geometry test the next day. In order to help the boy, Tressie asks Calvin to invite Murph over. While they wait, Tressie teaches Murph geometry in a fun way so that he doesn't get bored. After a little while, they start having fun and throwing paint at each other. Murph joins them later and forgets his argument with Calvin. The next day, Calvin and his friends discuss the difficulty of finding good parents. When Calvin tells them about Tressie's relationship with his father, they assume that he helped them reconcile. The following day, Calvin meets Tressie's father and brings him to Tressie's place. Tressie is angry with Calvin for intruding into his personal life, and they have a big argument about it. The next day, the Knights have a match against their biggest rivals, the Chicago Bulls. However, Calvin and Tressie still haven't resolved their differences, and they lose the game. The coach blames the team for such a poor performance in such a crucial match. There is only one match left to decide whether they will make the playoffs or not. The next day, a couple visits the orphanage and expresses their desire to adopt Calvin. He is skeptical after several failed meetings, but Petalman promises to give them a chance. He gives Calvin new shoes, telling him that he looks more presentable and that they will be even more inclined to adopt him. Before leaving, Calvin gives his lucky sneakers to Murph and asks him to keep them for the rest of his life. To try out the shoes, Murph puts them on and tries to play like Calvin, but he fails. He thinks they don't suit him and continues talking to his mother's photo. Ox and his friends threaten him to tell them where the shoes are, but he refuses. They take him to Petalman, who threatens to burn the only photo of Murph's mother that he possesses. With no other option, Murph tells them where he hid the shoes. Later, Petalman meets his associates and bets $100,000 against the Knights. Since he has hidden the lucky sneakers, he is confident that Calvin will have a horrific match. Calvin goes to dinner with his potential future parents, but they don't seem to fit into the family. Meanwhile, Tressie meets his father and reconciles with him. He misses Calvin terribly and talks to him about their upcoming match. He wants to adopt the boy but refrains from telling him after seeing the couple Calvin visited yesterday. 20 minutes before the match, Murph calls Calvin and talks to him about the sneakers. Calvin rushes to the shelter to retrieve them. The children gather together and decide to confront Petalman and ask him what he did with the shoes. This time, Ox helps them find the shoes, but he changes his mind after Petalman insults him. Once again, he takes the sneakers out of the trunk and returns them to Calvin. Then the children hop on their scooters and head to the match. Petalman tries to escape and calls his assistant to prevent Calvin from reaching the match. The assistant manages to stop Calvin, but the children successfully grab the shoes and help Calvin enter the stadium. As a last-ditch effort, Petalman tries to prevent Calvin from moving forward, but the boy crashes into him with his scooter and finally manages to make it to the match. At the moment he arrives, the team is being heavily dominated. However, as soon as Calvin starts playing, he quickly catches up to the opponent's score. However, he gets fouled in the middle of the match, and his sneakers tear apart. Calvin becomes nervous because he believes his magic lies in his shoes and that he can't score without them. Tressie motivates the boy by telling him that the shoes only gave him confidence, and his true talent is within him. In the end, Calvin maintains his level of play, and his team wins. Eager to spend the rest of his childhood as a normal kid, Calvin informs his coach that he doesn't want to renew his contract. He returns to the orphanage, which has completely changed due to Petalman's departure. Tressie talks to Calvin about his adoption and asks if he wants to be his son. Calvin agrees on the condition that Murph accompanies him. Their friend Rag is also adopted by another family. At the end of the movie, Calvin and Murph playfully wrestle with Tressie in their new room. I hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to see more content like this, and don't forget to give it a thumbs up to support us. Feel free to leave a comment if you want us to discuss your favorite movie. Take care, and see you soon.